depending where you're at. I'm Rob Podgorny, and I want to introduce our speaker for today. It's Dr. John McLennan, the essentially co-PI for Utah Forge, in charge of reservoir stimulation, reservoir activities, reservoir engineering. John is going to present us on the recent stimulation stages and that we just did earlier this year. And so without further ado, John, I'll turn it over to you. And John, when you get started, if you want us to hold questions, I'll usually manage questions in the chat and I'll relay them at the end, or I'll interject if I can. But it's totally up to you. Do you want to be interrupted as you go, or want questions to wait till the end?
Your discretion, Rob.
Okay. So anyone in the audience, we mute everyone as they come in. And if you have a question, please type it in the chat, and I'll kind of review and watch where it's going and decide whether to interrupt John at the time. If nothing else, we'll save questions to the very end. So John, the floor is yours. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rob. I'd like to talk about recent stimulation, but I think in advance of that, let's just do a brief recap of Forge. And this is a view of the Forge site taken a month or so ago, looking towards the east, towards the Mineral Mountains. And you can see in the foreground the 16A/B pad with frac equipment on the pad. And as you recall, in 2021, we drilled the injection well shown in red here, and that's known as 16A. And then in 2022, April of that year, we did 3 relatively small treatments at the toe of that particular well and mapped the microseismicity. And then in 2023, we drilled the injection well 16B to intersect the microseismic cloud from those toe stages. And subsequently, we did something like this. We didn't treat the entire well. We've left half of the well for future work. So to put this into perspective, you can see the wells that are at the Forge site. The initial well is the 5832 well. That's a vertical well. Subsequent to 5832, the 7832 well was drilled, and then subsequently the 16A well, which I talked about, which is the injection well. And the projection of that injection well on the surface is shown by the white dashed line, approximately. And subsequently, we drilled the 16B well immediately above the 16A well. And so you can see that there's a number of wells there where there is monitoring. And, naturally, the challenge in all of this operation is the temperature. We're anticipating, and from measurements, that within this conductive thermal regime, that the bottom hole temperature is somewhere about 230 degrees C. One of the important things that's going to come up through this discussion is that we had great collaboration with partners from the University of Texas and Rice University to install fiber optics in the annulus of the production well, the 16B well. And those have been invaluable. And we've had a couple of other vendors that have participated, certainly Alan Reynolds with the University of Texas and Dana Jurek with Nubrix, as well as many people from Silixa have participated in installing and monitoring the fiber optics. So let's just talk about a chronology of stimulation events. And to do that, first of all, we have to recall that one of the prime principles is a traffic light system to monitor seismicity, microseismicity in particular. And we had 3 wells with geophones in those wells, plus surface nodal networks to monitor the microseismicity. And there was a formalized plan that was adopted to regulate on-site activities in the event of unanticipated microseismicity. I might mention that during our stimulation, the largest event was a magnitude 1.9. And so none of the traffic light considerations were brought into effect. So let's just go back first and talk about the initial stimulation. As you recall, we had drilled the injection well 16A, and we did 3 fracturing stages in April of 2022 at the toe of 16A. And for this audience, I'm going to run through some of the details for each one of the stages. But as you can see, we had monitoring wells 78B 32, 58 32, and 56 32. And the first stage was an open hole stage and pumped about 4,200 barrels of fluid at 50 barrels per minute. And you can see from the plot where pressure is shown in red with the axis at the left in surface pressure in PSI, rate at right in barrels per minute. And we walked the rate up in 5-barrel increments. And the pressure in this open hole part treated with slick water was fairly flat and leveled off at about 6,000 PSI surface pressure. Now, recall this because we retreated this zone. We retreated all three of these zones that I'm going to talk about here in our 2024 stimulation. The second stage, we moved up the hole a little bit and we perforated 6 shots per foot, 60 degrees phasing over a 20-foot length and pumped slick water once again at 35 barrels per minute down casing. And you can see that it treated as if there was height growth or radial fracture growth. Once again, the red curve is pressure, the green curve is rate. Pressure to the left, surface pressure in PSI, rate to the right in barrels per minute. These were all followed by shut-ins and flowbacks. The isolation devices here were bridge plugs provided by Interwell. So after that, after a flowback period, which was required in order to run the bridge plugs, we moved back up the hole and once again perforated 20 feet, 6 shots per foot, 60 degrees phasing, and pumped at 35 barrels per minute. Now, note fundamentally, we pumped a small amount of microproppant, but essentially no proppant was pumped in any of these 3 stages. And once again, you can see from the treating records, the pressure in red, that this suggests likely upward growth or radial fracture growth. And indeed, these fracture geometries were supported by exceptional microseismic monitoring by Geoenergy Suisse and the University of Utah seismograph stations. You can see the 3 stages here from 2022. At this time, the blue well was there. The magenta well or the pinkish well had not been drilled yet. It's just marked for reference. And so you can see coming from the right, the toe of the well. The open hole section is shown in gray. Not too many events there, although some events did grow back towards the well, possibly along a natural fracture. The second zone treated with slick water was a little more diffuse. There may be some issues with the number of monitoring wells available, but certainly the third stage pumped with cross-linked carboxymethyl hydroxypropyl guar showed a relatively planar fracture, possibly with a bifurcation sometimes late in the treatment. So that set the stage. We had pumped those 3 fracs. We had established that we could successfully enter the granite. And so we went ahead and we started planning and we drilled the second well to intersect those zones. We did a circulation test between the 2 wells. And we found that while there was pressure communication, it was the communication was not commercial. So that definitely it was going to require stimulation of at least 16A, which is the injection well, and possibly also 16B, which is the production well. So that was built into the plan. You can see in the bottom the water source. Those are harpoon tanks on location, each holding 25,000 barrels of fluid. That water came from a well drilled on the 5832 pad that supplied all of the frac water that we would use. Now, thanks to many people in terms of putting this together, but in particular thanks to Kevin England, and this is a schematic that Kevin put together, showing the 16A well and where the treatments were on the 16A well. And the variables that we had on this well were number of clusters, the type of fluids, and to a certain extent the rates. And this was designed to look at single cluster treatments, plug and perf isolation on the 16 well, single clusters, multiple clusters, and different proppant schedules. as we were pumping the individual stages, we also had two commercial entities pumping tracers. One was Quantum Pro, which is a nanoparticle tracer system, and the other was Resman, which is a liquid tracers system. And each stage of the injection well that was fracked, and there were 8 stages that were pumped, was tagged with both of these unique tracers in each stage. We also had a bonus round. When we originally bid this out, we said, look, we're going to have one stage here where the successful vendor could pump a unique proppant system or something such as fibers or whatever. Nobody took us up on that, so we decided that we would try lightweight proppant, and indeed we pumped lightweight proppant in one of the stages, mixed in with conventional 100 mesh and 40/70 sand. So I'm just going to run through each one of the stages, and you can see on the left the high level discussion of these stages, and on the right you can see the treatment records. And so going from the top, you can see the black curve is an estimated bottom hole pressure. We have not finalized that bottom hole pressure. The friction may be a little different than what was done in this field print. The red is the surface pressure, and pressure is in PSI at the left. And then at the right, you've got rate in blue and concentration in, I guess that's green and purple. And so what you can see here in this particular treatment is that this was a re-stimulation of the first 3 zones that had been pumped in September 2022. And you recall that that was an open hole zone and 2 cased hole zones. The perforation lengths were 20 feet in each one of those cases. Here we were perforating 3-foot guns, plug and perf, run by Halliburton, wireline by Halliburton, and the guns by and the isolation plugs by 9 Energy. So this was a re-stimulation of the first 3 zones, and we pumped that at 50 barrels a minute with slick water with a modest amount of sand. Now, what you can see in this particular case is that we did indeed go to flush early, because we saw the pressure starting to build just before I think the 1.25 pounds of 40/70 were hitting the formation. And so this wasn't always the case, but we were monitoring the stages very closely just to try and get as much conductivity as we could without screening out. And we did not screen out. Then we moved up the hole, and stage 4 was basically new territory, single cluster, 3-foot guns pumped with slick water. And as you can see in the treatment record, recall once again that red is pressure, blue will be rate. That the rate was brought up gradually. We worked the rate up gradually, and then at 60 minutes or so, it broke back. And it started to treat smoothly, and it treated smoothly thereafter with slick water. And so this was an effective treatment with a single cluster, but it was slick water. So we moved up the hole, and then we tried single cluster with a cross-linked carboxymethyl hydroxypropyl guar. And once again, you can see, and that was pumped. Both of these were pumped at stabilized rates of 35 barrels per minute. So you can see we brought the rate up gradually on this, and that eventually, after a slight pressure rise, it broke back and it treated smoothly thereafter. And so this typically was the case with the viscosified fluids, that they seem to treat a little more easily than the slick water. That may be a personal bias, mind you. Then we moved on to stage 6, and we were in for a little bit of a surprise here, because these first 3 stages had treated pretty easily and pretty much as expected. We got to stage 6, and once again reminding you that red is surface pressure, and that's red to the on the left-hand vertical axis. This was slick water, single 6-foot cluster, excuse me. And we just could not get into this. And so we pumped for 4 hours and decided that, hey, the rate had got to 9 barrels a minute. this 8.8 barrels per minute, this was just not going to work. We could not pump sand. So we decided we'd go back in and we'd add a few more, another cluster of perforations. And so let's call that stage 6B. So you can see that this just could not treat below 8,500 PSI, which we had set as our maximum allowable surface pressure. And so difficulty in establishing rate, treating at maximum allowable surface pressure. And so we shut down after 4 hours of pumping. We went back in and we reperforated a little bit above. So we added we had a 3-foot gun that was available. We reperforated above and we went back in, and really no substantial improvement that occurred, and did all the the things that you would normally do, cycling, hard shutdowns. I think we even ran a little bit of HVFR just to see whether that would make a difference, but we just could not get into this formation, and so we basically shut this down. We were a little bit surprised, a little bit perturbed, but moved ahead with this stage. It was definitely taking fluid, but there was likely some sort of geologically mandated restriction where this was treating higher. And so to summarize, we ran another gun, 3-foot gun fired successfully, could not establish high enough rate, treated at the maximum allowable surface pressure, and we tried all the standard bells and whistles to get into the formation without success, to get more into the formation. So we said, okay, well, let's just move on to stage 7. And stage 7 was a 3-cluster scenario, 6-foot guns in each of the clusters, although that shows up as 7-foot, but that's okay. They were 6-foot guns. Let's see, how did this treat? Well, you can see that we got a little more rate, but it took us 6 hours to get up to 15 barrels per minute. And it was riding right around 8,000 PSI. We really didn't want to go above 8,000 PSI. This was with a cross-linked fluid, and so the fluid did not seem to make a difference, that there was something that was preventing us from developing sufficient rate to confidently pump sand, either the 100 mesh or the 47 that was planned. So this suggested that there was some sort of geologic issue that we really hadn't seen in advance. And so we went back to Clay Jones and Joe Moore at EGI, and they said, well, maybe there is something that shows up here. So you can note the litho log that Clay has put together from cuttings, and we have some triple combo. We have some gamma ray data that shows up. And it turns out that there is a slight tweak on the gamma ray, an increase in gamma over total gamma, and a reduction in potassium at precisely the 2 depths where we had trouble. So it suggests that there is indeed some sort of geologic rationale as to why these treated higher. And of course, this just opens the door for us to try and understand this further. And I think the jury is still out there. Nothing was too obvious on the sonic. So if we just look at dynamic modulus as plotted, or modulus as plotted from the sonic log that had been run in this well, you can see, if we start from the right-hand side, you can see where stage 3 was, that, modulus of just a little over 4 million. Stage 4, it was a little lower. Stage 5, somewhere in between. Stage 6, we may have just picked the wrong place. Maybe the modulus was higher. There's a spike there. Stage 7, we had 3 clusters, so it's a little bit surprising that we would see all of this. So no strong evidence from our conventional indicators of mechanical characteristics. And, remember further that most logging-based stress calculations would reflect this modulus trend as well to a certain extent. And we didn't see any indications of stress contrast. So we're still trying to understand exactly why these treated higher. and try to be able to rationalize that and avoid it in the future.
So John, it's a good place for a question here. Because we had two of them come in. Can you comment on the presence or absence of natural fractures in in net relations to how this might be affecting some of this behavior?
So we did not select our clusters based on geologic considerations. When we brought this up with our advisory group, they preferred to just select the cluster spacing geometrically. And so we did look at natural fractures, and where possible, we adjusted the clusters to preferentially find areas of natural fractures that showed up from the FMI, but it was not our primary consideration. And so that is something that, once again, the jury is still out on that.
Thank you. I think that gets to the heart of the two questions.
So we said, well, onwards and upwards along the well. And we moved on to our next planned stage, which was stage 8. And stage 8 had 8 clusters, 3-foot guns for each clusters, 6 shots per foot, 60-degree phasing, and cross-linked carboxymethyl hydroxypropyl guar, pumped at a rate of 80 barrels per minute. And this design was so that each cluster we would have along the well would have about the same rate going into it. And so you can see this treated very nicely, and it treated smoothly. So we brought the rate up, the rate became constant, it broke over, went flat, and then trends of upwards fracture growth tended to show up. And in fact, we placed a lot of sand here at concentrations up to 1.5 pounds per gallon of 40/70. So more than 1 million pounds of sand at 80 barrels a minute. And so this was really an extremely successful stage, at least operationally. That 8 clusters, how are we going to compare that? Well, the next stage, we're going to run 8 clusters, but we're going to use slick water. And what we saw on this, 8 clusters, 3-foot guns, 60-degree phasing, and slick water at 80 barrels a minute. And it treated okay, except, we saw that we were getting towards a screen out towards the end. And so one has to ask, by comparing stage 8 that treated so nicely with 8 clusters and stage 9 that eventually screened out, whether or not the fluid, the cross-linked fluid, was advantageous at least near the wellbore in terms of placing proppant. So we kept on going, and originally we're not going to have a stage 10. But we said, look, this stage 6 didn't work, and that stage 6 was the stage where we wanted to run the ultra lightweight proppant. And so this proppant has a specific gravity of 1.06, and it was mixed with sand from Genoa sand out of Nebraska with a specific gravity of 2.6 whatever. I don't specifically recall. There were slight differences between the 40/70 and the 100 mesh, but all in that specific gravity range. And so the ultra lightweight and the proppant was blended together, and you can see that this was a little more erratic in terms of the treatment. The rate was relatively constant. There's one tweak in the rate at about 110 minutes, but overall the rate was constant. But you can see variations in fracture growth, but successfully placed this at a relatively low in injection pressure. But in this particular case, the rate was only 30 barrels per minute. So successfully placed the lightweight. As to whether or not it has any value, I think that's yet to be seen as we carry out circulation tests between the wells. one of the concepts for running the lightweight was that, this overall, this could be quite a tight formation, and that it does take a substantial length of time for the fractures to close down. We know that because the pressure bleeds off very slowly. So presuming a long time to close, there is the possibility for settlement unless ledges and other holdup occurs. And so the thought was that the lower density specific gravity might impede downward settlement. And once again, as we evaluate future circulation testing data, we'll know that better. So the ultra lightweight was successfully run. One of the things that was fantastic during this was the ability to monitor strain and temperature and DAS at the production well. And so we were physically monitoring frac hits and strain fronts as we injected from the injection well, which was 300 feet below the production well. And this is just one example of some of the signals that we were seeing. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of interpreting this as outside of my sphere of knowledge, but what I just want to say is that we used the hits, we used the strain fronts to determine where we would perforate the 16B production well in advance of fracturing that well. So we used the strain and the temperature to select the zones, called out Halliburton on the fly, and they picked zones. Now, the first well was treated with plug and perf, pumping the plug and the guns down. All operations on the production well, the 16B well, were done on tubing. And so we would call out the guns to be fixed, to be assembled, and they were shipped out of Bakersfield by Halliburton, and it was a very smooth operation. Okay, so what happened on this well? Well, as I said, this is the production well. We had seen where the hits were. We perforated where the hits were, and we tried to keep treating intervals less than about 180 feet, just so that the guns could be run effectively. In this particular case, there were 4 clusters, and you can see they extended from 9690 to 9769. And you can see the records. Once again, we were pumping at about 60 barrels a minute, about 15 barrels per minute per cluster, but smaller treatments, much smaller treatments than what we had pumped in the production well, just so that we could optimize communication between the fracs from the injection well and these fracs from the production well. And so what do we notice? Well, you'll notice characteristically, look at the red curve, characteristically on the red curve, on just about every stage on the production well, you'll notice that it treated, pressure built, it broke over. In this case, it broke over after about 4 minutes. It started to lean over, and then all of a sudden, bang, there was a substantial and rapid drop. And the current theory is that's where connection or opening of connection with a fracture occurred. There could be other reasons, right? You could open another cluster, whatever, but this characteristically happened in each one of these. And so this treated pretty well. Pressure built a little bit at the surface at the end, but that's exactly what you want. You want to sort of live on the edge and make sure you're packed toward, at least at the production well side. Slick water in this particular job. Then we moved up the hole to the second zone. You can see in this particular case, there were 5 clusters that had been identified from the fibers pumped at 60 barrels a minute again. And once again, notice this characteristic broke over a little bit. That could be a rate change, but then bang, it finally caught and connected with some sort of feature that it had previously existed, or you opened up another cluster. We don't quite know, but that's sort of one of the current theories. Once again, you can see that this got packed towards the end of the treatment, and it treated quite well. Similarly, moved up to stage 3. In this case, there were 3 clusters that were treated. Relatively small treatment. All of these were about 4,000 barrels at 60 barrels a minute. And once again, you can see the same instance. You can see a little more complexity in terms of multiple pressure drops, connecting with multiple fractures, opening up multiple clusters, whatever. But it's effectively doing its job, it looks like. And pretty similar to all of the other treatments, all run with slick water. The 4th stage, once again, 4 clusters, sudden pressure drop, same story. Looks like there was effective communication. Fifth zone, we tried several times to treat this zone. We had two frac plug failures, and so then we ran out of plugs, and so we just perforated this particular zone without actually fracturing it. And with all the perforations, we only lost a little bit of the fiber near the termination. I have to say, yeah, you can see in the production well, the guns were oriented at nominally 0-degree facing. Halliburton's G-force gun deployment worked extremely well, and we did not lose a single fiber to perforating. And a lot of credit to the fiber people, in particular Alan Reynolds and Dana Jurek, who really helped us orient the guns. So just a few final observations before we talk about some circulation, is that the fiber was really a fabulous addition. It really helped us position the perforations, and we saw some substantial frac hits, and it worked really well. The lower right figure shows some of the scale that we developed in this particular case. What we're seeing here is that this probably was a reaction with a polyvis fluid that we had used, but we also had dark black scale. And if there are questions on that, I'm hoping Clay Jones or Stuart Simmons can address them. So a number of different scale issues that we need to diagnose as time goes on. Frac plugs worked extremely well when they were pumped down. They were less effective when they were run on tubing. So we can basically see we had, once again, GES and company provide us with fantastic microseismic data. The black dots are magnitudes greater than 1. Our maximum event was 1.9. The orange dots are in excess of magnitude 0.6. This view just shows that certainly the bigger stages were relatively planar, and maybe there's an easier way to look at this in terms of this. And so here are a couple of views that we've had, and at the extreme left you can see 2 large pseudo-planar stages. Those would be stages 8 and 9. 8 being that purplish color, and 9 being, I don't know, gold, or I'm not sure what color that is. Large treatments, long, moderately planar fractures. 8 and 9 may have interacted together. We're not 100% certain of that. I think it's premature to comment on that. But you can see relatively planar, discrete features. The red and blue blocks denote stages 6 and stages 7 that were not high points. Or, well, they were important because they designated that, this reservoir is not homogeneous. There are variations in this reservoir, and that the geologic discrimination is something that turns out to be important. So let's just talk about now. We've done all this fracturing. Then we wanted to see, well, did it do us any good? So what you can see here is that we had 2 workover rigs on location. The rig at the right is on the injection well. The rig at the left is on the production well. And so we carried out a circulation test between the wells. And I have to say that Calfrac did the pumping. They did a stellar job. Really appreciated all the work that they did. And so here's what happened during a 9-hour circulation test. So once again, blue is pressure, it's surface pressure, and whatever color that's a muddy red is the injection pressure, the injection rate. The injection rate shown on the right, the blue injection surface pressure shown on the left. And so we walked up the rate, and we got the rate up to about 16 barrels per minute. At that point, we saw that the pressure had actually built between the 2 wells to about 3,500 psi. And we did not want to go higher than that because we did not want to open up fractures once again. So we dropped the rate. And then we sort of kept the rate constant at about 13 and a bit barrels per minute for the rest of the 9-hour injection. You can see a shut-in that's partway through this job. And the reason for that shut-in is that before the shut-in, we did a production logging test, a spinner, a PTS measurement, a spinner measurement in the injection well. And after the spinner measurement on the injection well, we relocated that and did a spinner measurement on the production well. And we had to shut down briefly for that to occur. So nevertheless, this was sort of what we were seeing. What was more important and more heartening, well, it was heartening, is that here are the rates. So green is the injection well, and you recall that it's just under 16 barrels a minute, and about 13 and a bit barrels per minute later on. And the bluish purple is the production well. And so you can see that pumping in 13 barrels per minute in the injection well and gradually getting up to 8.2 barrels per minute in the production well. So about a 70% efficiency over a relatively short period of time. Definitive communication. I mean, this is a eureka moment in the Forge program. And let's see. So what else did we have? Well, not only do we have rate getting up to just a little over 8, but we started tracking the rate was the temperature, surface temperature at the injection well. And that discharge temperature is shown, the axis is on the left, and it's stabilized at about 282 degrees Fahrenheit after this particular period of time. So once again, I think another successful indication of what was going on. So we did indeed have some success with the pressure logging, production logging tools, the pressure temperature surveys. And here is some information from the injection well. Some doubt as to what happened below stage 6, just because of difficulties with running the tool and whatever, but maybe a third of the flow is coming from below stage 6, which is heartening. It says that there's a relatively uniform distribution of flow. Stage 7, you can see that it did not take too much fluid because, as we saw, it probably has a small aperture. We did not get proppant into that, and because the pressure was too high. So I think that this advocates once again that proppant is going to be required. Stage 8 was a relatively large treatment. It had 8 clusters. Just because of operational considerations, we're not able to discriminate at this time which ones of the clusters were taking fluid. I think we can go back and do some initial and additional analysis that might suggest which clusters were taking fluid. But stage 9, we were able to hold the tool above and below each one of the clusters. And what you can see, 8 clusters in stage 9. Cluster 1 did not take fluid. Cluster 3 did not take fluid. Relatively non-uniform distribution of flow into the individual clusters with slick water. It'll be interesting to process this further and see if we can tell stage 8 what the distribution of flow is. I'm not sure we can, but it was a cross-linked fluid in that particular case. The production well, we could not get the spinner tool down below where stage 5, around about stage 5, and so the jury's still out in what happened in stage 5. But we are planning a long-term circulation test, a 30-day circulation test. We will redo the production logging in each well, potentially cleaning out the production well so that we can get the tool all the way to bottom. And so this 30-day circulation test will happen in a couple of months. As you can see from this tentative schedule, and this is subject to change after approval by the stat and our advisory group and the DOE. But initially pump in at a relatively low rate with the production well shut in to do an interference test. Shut in both wells for a period of time to monitor pressure decay, and then go back at relatively low rates and walk the rates up fairly quickly to 10 barrels per minute and pump for just under 30 days to get a 30-day test that's carried out. A lot of issues that need to be sorted out before we pump this, including scale inhibition and oxygen scavenging and things like that. But this is tentatively what we're thinking about, subject to recommendations from our advisory panels. Anyways, that's about it. This is sort of the fulfillment going from Fenton Hill to Milford, 51 years. Here's where we ended up with the circulation test, that 70-degree efficiency, sort of a real success story. Anyways, I will try and answer any questions that people might have.
Thanks, John. That was great. Great synopsis there. It's a lot of work condensed down into 45 minutes. We fed a lot of the questions, and Kevin and I have been answering a lot of them in the chat as you were speaking. So you might get off easy today.
Well, it's better if you guys answer them than I do anyways.
We just signed you up for a whole bunch more work. Don't worry about it. There was a question from Luke Frash regarding the nominal treatment pressure in the successful cases, and what was the margin, the absolute margin away from the service pressure limit. So I guess how close are you to the line drawn in the sand for what our controls were operationally?
So, Luke, that's a good question, and it's kind of odd because some of them treated lower than others. I'm not sure we've had enough time to digest all of that, but we were easily sort of around the 7,000 psi level, and that gave us 1,000 psi of room.
Thanks, John. And so the floor is open now. So if anyone has further questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and we can let people go. Otherwise, we can get back to our days. So we'll give it another 30 seconds or so. And so, John, there's a question here. I don't know if you can see the chat, but there's a question about the 30-day circulation test and how much barrels of the cumulative volume plan to be recycled. I can probably answer that, but I'll let you do it.
So we looked at open and closed configurations for the circulation test, and ultimately decided that operationally we pretty much have to do an open system where we inject into the injection well, flow through the fractures, produce out of the production well through a sand separator, through a geothermal separator, and recycle the produce liquid into a pit. We have a pit that holds 125,000 barrels, and it'll probably be turned over 3 times. As that fluid is pumped upstream of the injection pumps, and these are just sort of like saltwater disposal pumps or something like that. We will be, and we haven't sorted out the details. We will be metering in likely oxygen scavenger and scale inhibitors. So probably turned over 3 times. We will lose some fluid, and we will top up in these pits using the well that we have on the 5832 pad that, it's maybe a half-mile away, and it's connected by a pipeline to the 125,000 barrel pit.
So Colin Sayers here. I raised my hand, but I guess you didn't see it.
I see it, Colin. I'll wait. I'll get to you, sir. 1 second. We're almost there for you. I want to follow up with one other question first here, and that has to do with the difficulty on frac plugs versus tubing on the wire line, John. Elaborate on why the difficulty?
Well, when we when in the injection well, that well was cooled down because of high rate, large volume in injections. And so there was no problem setting the plugs and running it. As a matter of fact, we used lower temperature explosives in that well for the perforating guns. In the production well, everything was run on tubing for 2 reasons. One, and I didn't talk about this, originally we were going to do a sealed well bore experiment. We had an R&D plug in the bottom of the well. And that plug passed its pressure tests, but ultimately after a couple of weeks did fail. So that if that plug had held, we would be in a closed environment that would be difficult to circulate and reduce the temperature. Also, in that injection well or production well, the treatments were substantially smaller, and so you would not have as much cool down. And the third point, and not everybody agrees with this, but the impression that we received from vendors was that orienting the guns with 0-degree phasing to avoid the fibers would be easier on tubing. So ultimately, the decision was made to use HNS explosives to run the bridge plugs or the frac plugs on tubing, and similarly with the guns. And I think just, it's your old enemy is temperature. Once again, was just problematic in that particular well, and we'll work through that in the future.
Colin, now to you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, maybe you could go back, John, to my question in the chat, which I feel wasn't really answered.
Well, that could be the case.
So I was interested in the difficulty in treating stage 6, and I was wondering if this suggested that natural fractures were important for fracking the granite or treating the granite. And I was wondering, what does the image log show in the vicinity of stage 6? I mean, I'm sure you looked at the image log in deciding where to put the treatment. So what does the image log show there?
In any of these zones, and maybe Kevin can help me out here, we definitely did try and locate things in the image logs, but as I said, we were obliged to locate our clusters geometrically, but stage 6 only had a single cluster. That's true. So we did not see an obvious fracture for stage 6 or stage 7, and there was no real justification for us moving the perforations one way or the other. And maybe Kevin England recalls better than I.
Can I share my screen real quick, John? I can show you what we did on location.
Yep, you bet.
Okay. Yeah, so it could be that natural fractures are important for treating, right? I mean, that's a hypothesis that you haven't disproved yet.
I think that is true. That remains true.
Okay, so can you see my screen here now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Colin, when we were on location, so even way before when the planning was all done, and John mentioned this in his presentation, that the decision was taken to make the clusters geometrically spaced as opposed to selectively locating um, for this stimulation operation. Now, going back to April 2022, I don't know, it's easy to see on here, but first, this is based on the image log. This is from Rob Pagorni and Alita and Branko's work
What's
on
being plotted there? What's on the y-axis?
these are fracture intensities essentially, Rob.
Okay.
That's correct?
Yeah, so we see on stage 6 that it looks quite low, right?
Yeah, so on stage 6, so see this where I'm pointing right here, where the cluster was essentially shot, where this would indicate no fracture intensity, and we couldn't pump in initially on stage 6. However, as John showed, we did a stage 6B, and we shot another perforation cluster, and we shot that cluster right in the middle of this fracture intensity. And unfortunately, we didn't get any improvement in the treating. We ended up, well, we got better injection, but we still didn't get enough injection, enough rate to confidently start pumping proppant.
And that fracture there that you're showing, do you know from the image log what its orientation is relative to the minimum stress?
So that's,
so
so Kevin, I can help here a little bit.
Yeah.
So, or if Alita's is on, if she can come on, but this is not individual fractures. So this is actually a fracture intensity. And it's some percentage of fractures that are critically oriented or you're critically stress oriented to fail. So, you know, it was normalized from, like, I believe 0 to 1. So you could see the plot there a little bit to the right of where Kevin's pointing would be like the highest propensity for failure or for favorability, and a flat line would be 0, of course. So that's still, even that lower end there is not a high intensity of fractures anywhere shown on the screen except for the ones that wasn't shown.
And what's the reason for the different nature of the peaks? So some of these peaks, like at 9950, are kind of quantized, they're flat, whereas at 10,000, it's a kind of raggedy appearance. So
it's a binning. So it's just a rolling average of fracture intensity over, I believe, a 10-foot moving window. So it just has to do with the cumulative number of interpreted fractures that are critically stressed within that window.
What's the units then? I mean, I can't see on the
It's
vertical
dimensionless.
scale.
There's no units there. It's a dimensionless number.
But it goes up in steps, which implies, you know, 1 fracture, 2 fractures, etc. I mean, it seems to be quantized, right?
I think it's 0 to 1.
It's relative. And so it just has to do with what we picked on the yeah, but it's not a physical parameter that's being plotted. It's just essentially just it's normalized 0 to 1 for a number of fractures within that window that are favorably oriented within some threshold over that time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Rob, if I can sort of jump in there, if this is the work that I did previously, yeah, I was like jumping in 1 meter increments and then binning on that 10-meter window, as you say. And then it was just, you know, ascribing a score to each fracture based on its orientation in regard to the stress field. So it's sort of a combination of factors there.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question here. And we had quite a few rolled into here. I had a question about essentially nominated perforation frictional losses. From Luke, does anyone want to elaborate on that one between either Kevin or John?
Yeah. So we haven't gotten that far into the analysis yet. We do have a pretty good handle, we feel, on the pipe friction for the fluid. So we need to go back in and try to separate total friction into pipe and perf, but we haven't done that yet.
Thank you, sir. Moving here further along, we had a question about during the short-term, the circulation test. Were we able to get downhole temperatures in the production well? And I believe the answer to that would be no, or whatever just came off the spinner log. That's all we got. There was pressure temperature.
The answer is we're expecting to receive downhole temperature data because we do have Baker Hughes pressure temperature gauge just below the build.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
And but that data is just is on the way.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think that actually gets the last of our questions, and we are approaching the top of the hour. So in absence of any other questions, or if I missed your question or comment, you could speak up now. Otherwise, I think we'll let John off the hook, and we can call it good.
What's the plan after the 30-day test?
Move into
So-
stage 4 of Forge. And that scope is to be determined. It's something we're in negotiations with DOE right now. John, I don't think we can say much more than that. If Joe's on, maybe he want to comment on that. I'm not sure if Joe's here. Yeah, we better just leave that one open-ended for now, John, I think.
Discretion is the better part of valor there.
Thank you, sir.
So Rick Chalaternik, I think, yes, sometime in the future, disposable fiber may have a role. Actually, Jonathan Aho Franklin is going to run an intervention fiber during our 30-day injection test. So all of these technologies, I think, have room.
Perfect. Yeah, good. Thanks.
And I want to close it off with Lou's question on treatment pressure, is so high. I'm not sure if it is so high, but I'll let you comment on that one, John, and we'll close off the questions there.
Well, we pretty much can put it down to 4 various things. I mean, I can jot down notes. As Colin said, maybe there weren't as many natural fractures that would favor the initiation. That's certainly feasible. Maybe there's something about the specific perforations. Although as Kevin pointed out, we did perforate the second time and where we thought there were going to be some weaknesses. The third thing relates to modulus, and modulus is potentially going to have a role. And the fourth thing relates to stresses. And the last two, I think, are particularly important because too often we say, well, this is a homogeneous formation. Well, indeed, it is not a homogeneous formation. It is a mixture of gneissic rock and granitoid rock. And I don't think we necessarily appreciate the geologic manifestations of those different formations. But I think there are subtle variations in stress, and there's certainly variations in modulus that maybe we need to be taking into account further. And Colin, yeah, Mark McClure did run a pre-frac res-frac model, and we'll revisit that with Mark just to see how the data do compare.
All right, John. Well, I'm going to thank you here, and we'll call it off here at the top of the hour. So this will be recorded. It'll be available on the Utah Forge website. The slides will also be made available there at the same place. You can take a look at those later. And any further questions, you can shoot an email to anybody on the leadership team. You can find those addresses on the Utah Forge website, or if you don't already know them, you can reach out to the address you signed up for this seminar. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, John.
Sure thing, Rob.